What's up, everybody? We're back again. Core Use Bloody History. Continue on Loran Hall. We'll be on Loran Hall for about 2 fucking weeks because this guy, ooh, what a scumbag this guy is. And I love scumbags who just can't stop running their mouth, which is exactly what Loran Hall does in the 1970s. He never puts blame on himself. Notice none of these conspirators ever say, yep, I did it. I pulled the trigger. Except for, like, James Files, who's a total fucking loser, not involved in this at all. So, it's a name we're never going to mention again on this show. But, yeah. So, we're going to continue along. Loran Hall being one of 2 shooters on the 6th floor. The other being Lawrence Howard, obviously. God damn it, there's a speck right on my glasses that I can't seem to get off. Oh, well. So, I'm going to try to make these Loran Hall shows pretty full. There's a lot of information out there, especially in the Weisberg files. These Weisberg files are pretty good. Like, here's the problem. Here's the thing. Like, Jim Garrison's files are stripped down to next to nothing. All the good stuff has been removed. I'd say we probably only have 20 to 30% of Jim Garrison's files. And they're mixed up, all kinds of screwed up. Like, some of the good stuff is in the lead files, and some other good stuff is in the miscellaneous files, and so it seems like someone went to great lengths to hide all the good shit in the stuff that they found in miscellaneous files, right? So, but then the problem with fucking Weisberg's files is this guy was so prolific in his letter writing. The guy sat, I don't know how he fucking had any time to do any research. He sat around writing fucking letters all day. But it's just so many fucking letters, it's pointless to read them all. Like, I had 1 or 2 that I was going to read today, and as I started going through them, I just decided to skip them, because they really had nothing to do with nothing. It started off with, hey, can you get me this information on Loran Hall? And then 10 pages on some fucking politician who he knew. Like, give me a break. I don't need to read that shit. So, we are going to begin. I'm trying to keep these in order, right? 1 through 90-something, whatever, in the order that Weisberg collected them. But this one I'm going to do out of order. This one is PDF 22. And then we'll be going on to PDF 15. Just because this is a really good document. It's a background briefing on Loran Hall. It has a lot of pertinent information. And this is one of the first documents I found on Loran Hall years ago. So, let us begin. Background briefing on Loran Hall. Prepared by the Assassination Information Bureau, June 7th, 1977. Loran Eugene Hall, a.k.a. Skip Hall, and Lorenzo Pasio, was born on January 4th, 1930 in Newton, Kansas. His criminal record includes an arrest for writing bad checks in 1956 in Wichita, Kansas, being jailed in 1959 by the Cuban government for plotting revolutionary activities, see below, an arrest in 1961 again in Wichita, this time for shoplifting, and an arrest on October 16th, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, for possession of dangerous drugs, see below. Soldier of Fortune, Hall was a mercenary soldier of fortune who, in the late 1950s, fought as a captain in Castro's Revolutionary Army. It's as per the New York Times, April 22nd, 59, July 4th and 9th, 1959. Note, Hall served in Castro's army, the 76th of July movement, under Camilo Cienfuegos, who later got Hall out of jail in July of 1959 after a 6-month stint. By 1959, Hall turned against Castro and became involved in a scheme to overthrow the Nicaraguan dictator Somoza. This attempted armed expedition was apparently designed to make it appear that Castro was exporting his revolution and thus provoke Castro's downfall. The plot was ultimately stopped by the Cubans, and many of the principals were jailed, including Loran Hall and John Wilson Hudson. Others involved here: Colonel Gomez Leslie Norman Bradley, Paul Hughes, Efren R. Picardo, and Joseph Barter. Also in prison at this time was Santos Traficante Jr. On July 8, 1959. Castro deported 3 Americans: Traficante, Hall, and Henry Savadra, a former employee of the Capri Hotel in Havana, which was reportedly run by a syndicate including Traficante and Charlie the Blade Taurine, recently subpoenaed by the Dade County, Florida authorities investigating the murder of Johnny Roselli. Okay? So, I need to make this 100% clear. I've looked into Henry Savadra. He's mostly a fucking nobody. I believe that that's an alias for Jack Valenti. I can't prove it. I have no evidence other than the weird circumstantial surroundings here. But my suspicion is that Jack Valenti was locked up at this time, because remember, he did a stint at Triscornia with Trafficante, and was identified, or he was called by McWillie, Giuseppe De George, right? And Giuseppe De George, I'm convinced, and so is Ryan Dawson, that Giuseppe De George is Jack Valenti. That being said, Giuseppe De George was alleged to have been a gambler at the Capri who was such horrible at gambling that he lost all of his money. Okay? So, that tells me a couple things. First off, Giuseppe De George, that is referenced by McWillie, is 100% not the Giuseppe De Giorgio who is the heroin trafficker. I believe there is some name swapping going on here intentionally. But Giuseppe De George, if you'll recall, what is Jack Valenti's father's name? Giuseppe Valenti. And what is his mother's name? Josephine De George. Right? Giuseppe De George. There you go. So, I am convinced also that just based on these relationships, that Jack Valenti is the Henry Savadra they're referring to, and that this is nothing more than an alias. Can I prove it? Is it anything more than a fucking hunch based on adequate circumstantial evidence? No, absolutely not. But I trust I will find out one day. Trafficante Hall and Henry Savadra, a former employee of the Capri Hotel in Havana, which was reportedly run by a syndicate including Trafficante and Charlie the Blade Tourine, recently subpoenaed by the Dade County, Florida authorities investigating the murder of Johnny Roselli. Interesting. So I wonder if Charles the Blade Tourine had anything to do with the murder of Johnny Roselli, because I don't think any information's ever come out on who actually knocked off Roselli. The documentary Momo about Giancana does a pretty good job of identifying the people who knocked off Giancana. It was his guys. It was his own guys, right? And it was probably greenlit by Tony Accardo, who was in retirement at the time. I guess these guys don't really go into retirement. They become kind of advisors at some point. But the movie speculated Tony Accardo gave the green light to kill Giancana based on his carelessness and a whole bunch of other things. But I've never heard of Charlie the Blade Tourine being involved in the murder of Johnny Roselli. I think that's pretty fascinating. In 1961, Hall moved to California, where he set up his personal base of operations for his anti-Castro activities. However, in 1962 to 1963, he was associated with elements of the no-name Key group of CIA agents and anti-Castro guerrillas in southern Florida. Santos Trafficante Jr. was asked about this group in March before the House Select Committee. It is known that Trafficante made contacts with some of the no-name Key group members and may have funded its operations. Twice during the fall of 1963, Hall visited Dallas, first to raise funds for the extremist exile organizations, reportedly for Frank Sturgis's International Anti-Communist Brigade. William Turner, Power on the Right, Berkeley, Ramparts Press, 1971, page 106. And a second time with a trailer full of arms for Cuban exiles in Miami. Lester Logue meeting. Hall acknowledged in a 1968 interview with Harold Weisberg that he had been in Lester Logue's Dallas office on October 17, 1963, where an offer of $50,000 was made to shoot the president. He told Weisberg that he didn't think Logue would have been for it. Later he adds, quote, "And anyway, I said this. Lester Logue had nothing to do with it, JFK's death." Weisberg interview, page 57. In a 9/1/68 National Enquirer article, Hall does not name Logue, but states that radical right-wingers, including ex-military officers, made the offer. This is in sharp contrast to Hall's statement on December 29, 1967, in a Channel 7 11 o'clock news program in Los Angeles, when he told a reporter that the liberals had a hand in killing JFK because Kennedy was moving towards the center. In the Enquirer piece, Hall said that he was in Dallas to, quote, discuss funds and pick up supplies for his group, La Sombra, which was formed to host raids from Florida to Cuba, as well as smuggle arms and ammunition to guerrilla groups. On October 16, 1963, Hall was stopped in his car in Dallas, allegedly for having a concealed license plate, and was subsequently booked for possession of dangerous drugs, pep pills found in the glove compartment. Hall maintains that it was a fake charge designed to place on the record his presence in Dallas. There have been allegations that Lester Logue put up the $5,000 bond to get Hall out of jail the following day. The Sylvia Odio affair. Mrs. Sylvia Odio, born in Havana in 1937, was a well-educated member of the Cuban upper class. In 1960, she fled Cuba to the U.S. according to the Warren Commission. It appears that both her and her parents are political prisoners of the Castro regime. Mrs. Odio is a member of the Cuban Revolutionary Junta, JUR, an anti-Castro organization. It has been reported that in late September of 1963, 2 Cubans or Mexicans and 1 American, believed to be Lee Harvey Oswald, visited the Dallas home of Sylvia Odio. In checking out this story, the FBI interviewed Loran Hall on September 16, 1964. At that time, Hall reportedly told the FBI that he had been accompanied at Mrs. Odio's by Lawrence Howard and William Seymour, who apparently had a resemblance to Oswald. However, 4 days later, on September 20th, Hall retracted his earlier statement and said that he was accompanied by Seymour and Howard in Dallas on separate occasions and had no specific recollection of having visited Mrs. Odio. I think that date is actually September the 24th. I don't believe it is September 20th. I believe it's September 24th. Mrs. Odio was interviewed about the incident and was shown photographs of Hall, Howard, and Seymour. She could not identify any of them as having been among the 3 men who visited her home. Yeah, that's when she realized what the fuck time it was. She's like, oh my God, I can't say that it was them, right? So it is important to note that the FBI transmitted the contents of the September 16th interview with Hall to the Warren Commission after it had already received a retraction from Hall on September 20th. The Hall story was used by the Warren Commission in refuting Mrs. Odio's firm belief that Oswald had visited her home, at a time when the Commission believed he was riding a bus en route to Mexico City. Furthermore, an FBI report dated October 2nd, 1964, which includes all the above information as well as the results of an interview of William Seymour where he denies he was in Dallas in September of 63, maintains he had no contact with Sylvia Odio, is contained in CD 1553. This report was transmitted to the disbanded Warren Commission well before the release of the hearings and exhibits at the end of November 1964. The document was not included among the exhibits. References to the Odio affair, Sylvia Meager, Accessories After the Fact, Vintage Books, 1976, page 376 to 387. The rifle incident, CD 1179. Pages 295 to 98. The Watley Report relates how Loran Hall redeemed a rifle he had pawned in Los Angeles with a check issued by the American Committee to Free Cuba, referred to as the Committee to Free Cuba in the report. The American Committee to Free Cuba is a Los Angeles group close to the Christian anti-communist crusade of radio preacher Billy James Hargis. Robert Sam Anson, They've Killed the President, Bantam Books, page 1975, 196 to 198. The FBI's response to and report of this incident is most peculiar. The Watley Report relates how Dick Watley, an anti-Castro guerrilla trainer, sent Loran Hall and G.P. Hemming, that's Jerry Hemming, to see Richard Hathcock, referred to in this report as Hathcock, in early 1963. Watley had known Hathcock for several years. Hathcock was a private detective whose company was the Allied International Detectives of Los Angeles. His partner at the firm was Roy Barton Payne, Payne. Hall and Hemming, who stated that they were broke, had come to pawn a set of golf clubs and a .30-06 Johnson semi-automatic rifle with a Bushnell variable powered scope. Hathcock loaned them $50 on each item. Then on September 18, 1963, Hall returned with a check from the ACFC and retrieved the rifle. CD 1179 notes that Hall came in and got a high-powered rifle which looked identical to the one shown on television on November 23, 1963, as being used in the assassination of President Kennedy. That last sentence is underlined. I don't know why, and I've never heard that reference before. Shortly after September 18, 1963, Hemming called Hathcock from Florida, inquiring about the rifle. When told Hathcock had given it to Hall, Hemming became irritated to some extent. To further document this part of the incident, there exists a Miami police intelligence report dated November 1st, 1963, which reports an allegation from Hemming, the subject of the report, that Loran Hall stole 2 of his rifles from his Miami apartment on October 31st, 1963. In addition, Hemming alleges that recently in California, Hall also stole a Johnson .30-06 from the subject. Hemming. End quote. In his 1968 interview with Harold Weisberg, page 52, Hall referred to this rifle matter. I do know that Jerry was mad at me because I took his Johnson with a telescopic sight, that he had threatened to come down and shoot me and all this jazz. The last paragraph of the Watley Report states, quote, no further investigation was conducted, as it is obvious that the rifle mentioned above was not used in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy, quote. It is not clear why the FBI dropped this pawned rifle quickly after checking it out in 1963 and reported it to the Warren Commission inadequately and only after a long delay. This Whatley report is buried in a large CD full of miscellaneous allegations, and its title, referring to Dick Whatley, has little to do with the story. Hall's past statements and actions post-1963. On May 2nd, 1968, after being subpoenaed by New Orleans DA Jim Garrison on December 26, 1967, Hall called a news conference in L.A. and announced that his memory had been jogged. He was now willing to go to New Orleans and appear as a material witness for Garrison. At the Garrison trial, Hall implicated Edgar Eugene Bradley as a conspirator in the JFK assassination. Peter Noyes' Legacy of Doubt. Pinnacle Books, New York, 1973, page 162 to 177. Regarding Hall's past statements as to who killed JFK, at first he stated that he believed the liberals had a hand in killing JFK because Kennedy was moving towards the center, a statement made on December 29, 1967 on the 11 o'clock news, Channel 7, Los Angeles. Later, Hall changed his mind about the liberal establishment being involved because, quote, so many facts had been brought to my attention, end quote. L.A. Free Press, May 24th, 68. He stated then and again in September 68 that he felt the assassination was precipitated by, quote, right-wing radicals and fascists. All right, so that was a very good background briefing on Loran Hall. It's kind of abbreviated, if you ask me. I'd like to see like 100 pages in detail on what he was fucking doing at this time and his thoughts and things that he said in different interviews. But since we'll be spending the next couple weeks on Loran Hall, I'm hoping that we'll stumble across at some point his testimony before the HSCA and all the times he ran his fucking mouth and said different shit like all these other dumb fucks, right? So to all the people out there who are like, oh, there's no evidence that anybody had anything to do with this thing except for Oswald, like, go fuck yourself. Like, when you get into the nuts and bolts of this and you start to get into Loran Hall and his statements and all the statements of all these other fucking idiots who like just like Kerry Thornley and Thomas Beckham and all these fucking guys and Fred Lee Chrisman, and you start to like see how they're a bunch of fucking lying con men, fraudulent CIA fucking hack spooks, right? It becomes obvious they were all involved in the assassination, right? It's just like brutally obvious. Brutally obvious, okay, so. But this was good. The Assassination Information Bureau, if I'm not mistaken, is like a panel that was put together by Weisberg himself. This guy was a real go-getter, but I can't believe he didn't put the shit together. I mean, the guy wrote enough fucking books and stuff on this subject. You'd think he'd be able to figure it out. Moving on. Okay, this is a letter. Starts, Dear Bryson, dated 4/21/79. It's a letter written by Harold Weisberg. As a result of one FOIA lawsuit, after you were here, I've gotten well over 100,000 pages of formerly secret FBI records. I go over them with some regularity and make separate copies for subject filing. The records as I received them stay that way for the university archive, in which they will all end. Last night I came across some new ones on Hall, who I regard as an ingrate and whose conduct was unprincipled. I have no personal interest in the pictures he stole after I trusted both of you not to. I never had any intention of publishing them or using them in any way. He has become a part of history in his own way. My writing on that is past so far as I can anticipate, and my interest is in preserving an historical record. If he wants any of the stuff I find, a precondition is the return of what he stole. So, this Mr. Bryson obviously met with Mr. Weisberg, and he and Loran Hall stole a bunch of his stuff. Scumbag. 10/4/77. Let me see what's the date on that one. This is before. This is a prequel letter from 2 years before that one. Dear Bryson, yesterday I received a call from a friend who was acting as a consultant to a foreign TV network, English language, with the request that I use my good offices to arrange for them to interview Skip. Skip is Loran Hall. I said I would not disclose how he could be reached or where he is, but upon getting some assurances of the matter in which he would be treated, would relay the request. Today the producer phoned me. I told him I could make no guarantees, but would not forward a request without the guarantee that there would be ground rules to which Hall's lawyer would have to agree, which really means specified. While I believe there is probably little you would want to preclude, one thing would be that they would not go into areas to which Hall, under your guidance, would have to be refusing to respond. It is a very simple matter for interviewers to make the interviewee look very bad. Skip might welcome the challenge of a Mike Wallace type thing, but it could ruin him forever, and I think CBS might well enjoy it. These people are deep into a show for which they have already done so much research. They're going to do it whether or not they have Skip on film. If they do not have him, he may not look very good and may look very bad as a result of others they will have like Hemming. I know there has been that contact. This is the only one of the reasons I suggest you give this serious thought and let me know. It is my belief. If my belief means anything to you, my belief is that Hall should do it. Among the side considerations is that these people have a tape of the foolish things Hall said to Weberman, who taped it, entirely confidential. I also have that tape, and Skip should have listened to his wife and said nothing. What he did say can hurt him much. Weberman can be interviewed, and he can repeat exactly what Skip then said. Among the positive reasons is that he can help himself if he can be more like he was with Lardner, with a little less profanity, rather as with Weberman. So I just want to point something out here. Weisberg is referencing, like, videotaped fucking interviews. Like, 100,000 pages of FBI documents. Where the fuck is this stuff? Where is this stuff? So we've got currently released, categorized as JFK-related documents, over 5 million pages. Okay? This 5 million fucking pages is nothing compared to what has disappeared over the last 60 fucking years. I mean, 100,000 pages of FBI documents that fucking Weisberg had, that we've probably seen maybe, 5 or 10% of it, and the rest of it's just fucking in the wind, right? Where did it go? Where is this videotaped interview of Loran Hall? Where are these dozens of interviews that CBS had access to that we don't have access to? Fuck. People don't even understand the beginning of the level of the cover-up of this thing that goes on to this very fucking day. All right, let me continue. Although this is foreign, there will be some domestic backlash at least. This can help you when it becomes clear that the reason there was no testimony in June is because there was prejudice and there was no protection. On this, I could lead them to see that Skip then was quite willing to respond under proper conditions, and that the very day he spoke very openly with a reporter who assured confidence and has preserved it. We can discuss this more if you'd like. You may want to ask Art's opinion. He knows the medium and is an experienced reporter. I'd be willing to present and to assist as well as caution whatever you decide. There is the actuality that as an alternative, they can always use prior printed interviews. They are interested in the mafia and the JFK assassination and Cuban angles. They are interested in Ruby and the mob scene. They have a source other than the nut Hudson was saying that Ruby visited Santos in the Kwanzaa hut, whatever the fuck that is. And they will be shooting the middle of this month or later. I'll hear from them probably about or just before the 15th. I do not believe the Hudson story and have told them this. Their consultant has spent much of the past 2 years interviewing various mafia figures, including some not spear carriers. If you decide to do this, I suggest you ask Art for what he thinks may be asked and what you should want aired in addition to what you both think. By now you know what you can expect of me by way of getting the truth told and heard. I think your client can stand some good public relations, whether it is aired before or after the committee hears him. Okay, so this motherfucker is... Okay, Bryson is Loran Hall's attorney. To put these last fucking 2 letters in context. So he's trying to get him to get Hall to say this fucking thing and do this interview, but get your ducks in a row. See, like, Weisberg knows that Loran Hall was involved with the assassination, and he's just trying to coax him in whatever way he can. But see, if I was involved in the assassination, reading these fucking letters and being somewhat of a smart guy, I'd be like, this motherfucker's trying to milk me. No fucking way would I do this shit if I was Loran Hall. If I was Loran Hall and Lawrence Howard and these guys, like, Loran Hall is such a dumb fuck, right? At least, like, Jerry Hemming tried to avoid all these people until he was, dragged into it in the 70s. Same thing with Lawrence Howard. That motherfucker went and he went and sat in a fucking hole for 15 years until researchers found him. William Seymour, who's still alive to this very fucking day, cocksucker, he still hasn't made any fucking statements. So yeah, so Loran Hall is such a dumb shit. He wanted people to know he was involved without having them know he was involved. He wanted to be a braggart and maybe use this to make some money, but it never worked out for him. I really just have no respect for these fucking guys. I think your client can stamp some good public relations, whether it is aired before or after the committee hears him. If you want, I can make suggestions. One I would urge is an informal environment, such as we had with Lardner, and dependence upon adherence to the ground rules if there is deviation. Under these conditions, Skip can project himself pretty well and still be protected against such things as his natural language. And I would still like my pictures returned. Sincerely, Harold Weisberg. Oh, so he's trying to get his pictures back for like 2 fucking years. That's hilarious. All right, let me see. Is there anything more important here? All right, let's see what this one is. 9977, Mr. Bryson Mills. Now we got a complete name. Mr. Bryson Mills in Wichita, Kansas. Dear Bryson, some of what I loaned you was with your 9-7. You did not return any of these pictures. Would you please locate and return them? You say that these were out of your possession for a while. If this was to Skip, please do not accept his denial. I do want those pictures. Only copies here. I have no objection to his copying them, but I do want them back. Your note says the 9/14 hearing has been continued. That is probably good, but other explanations are possible. One is the confab they are having this weekend. I declined to be there despite they're asking me twice. They have invited about a dozen of those called critics of the Warren Report for some of the brainstorming. Who knows what can emerge from that? Well, what do you know? Way back in 77, the fucking JFK grifter community was having conferences. Fucking goddamn scumbags. I fucking hate the Kennedy research community. Every goddamn last one of them. Fucking such goddamn ignorant, fucking self-aggrandizing goddamn grifters. All right, so let me continue. Please believe me, these people are desperate for something they can palm off as an accomplishment. You goddamn right. You're goddamn right. All that money and less than nothing to show for it. Only BD stuff. If you and or Skip would like me to arrange something like the off-the-record deal with George Lardner of the Washington Post, let me know, assuming the committee does not cancel the hearing out entirely. I think it's possible with the New York Times and with some TV people. I've gone over the list of names. Good idea, but quite incomplete if you think you'll have to know about them. If there's a hearing, I advise against assuming forthrightness from the committee, and I advise in favor of real preparation. 2 examples. Hall does not have Pena, or you forgot it, but he wants me to see Pena, or Orestes, that is, in New Orleans. Orestes was my friend. He told me. He also is flipped out and is saying weirdo things and believes them. You do have Alba. If this is the Alba of New Orleans garage, then it is from one of the magazines that Oswald tore from, with which he ordered the rifle, according to the official story. Let me pause right here real quick. Orestes Pena was like the bar owner of the Havana bar in New Orleans. I believe he was the manager of the bar at the time when allegedly Oswald was seen in there with the husky Latina with the pockmarked face, right? And he was vomiting and all that shit, right? So obviously it was Seymour and Lawrence Howard once again. That's all in the book. And if you haven't bought the book, please go buy the book. Okay, it's on Amazon. You can pick it up today. Or you can actually have a bunch of signed copies that you guys can hit me up directly for. All right. See the possible complications, or with the omission of Houston and then sidekick, the story I went into while we were drinking with Lardner. Corky is also a friend, and I know what he can have told committee. This list also includes no preparation on the Pauley story. So what I'm getting at is that if there is to be a hearing, you have much homework yet to do. Whatever your personal experiences with them, I think you'll err not to assume that these committee types are both desperate and madly chasing all the nut theories. More than enough comes back to me for me to be certain. If you want to be prepared by knowing what you should know, I'll do what I can to help you. Getting to and from Washington is a little more difficult for me now, though. Some tests have been made, but not a full diagnosis. All right, so here we go. We have a huge list of names here attached to this. Most of them seemingly irrelevant. These are all just leads that Weisberg was digging into at the time. Yeah, like nothing is jumping off the page here as being overly relevant. Nope. Nope. Roy Hargraves. We'll end up doing some stuff on Roy Hargraves here because I'm not buying anything. Roy Hargraves didn't have anything to do with the assassination. Or maybe he did on the level of like Jerry Hemming, which is like next to nothing, right? So we'll get into him eventually. All right, another letter from law offices of Mills, Bear, and Westling from Bryson Mills, Loran Hall's attorney. Harold Weisberg, to Harold Weisberg, publisher. Dear Harold, I apologize for being so delinquent in returning the enclosed material to you. My copies were out of my possession for a time, and I really didn't want to go to the expense of making an additional set of copies unless necessary. I hope that it has not been inconvenient for you. In addition to the documents you loaned me, I am sending you a list of names and identifying information that I've compiled from talking to Skip. This list reflects persons that Skip either has had contact with previously or gained information on relative to his experiences, relative to which you are familiar. As far as I know, we are still scheduled to appear on September 14th, but that could be changed between now and then. I will advise you if there's any change. Talking about a hearing and him showing up to testify before the HSCA. P.S. Have just learned that the 9/14/77 hearing has been continued. All right, moving on. This seems like a various collection of documents. I'll just go ahead and I'll read through it. Comments on FBI HQ 62-109060 records mentioned in Paul Hoke's notes. Paul Hoke was another researcher. I'm not too familiar with his work. Must not have been that great. But like I say about these old school researchers, the thing that they're good for is they dug up a whole bunch of dots, right? They dug up a lot of the basic information that was necessary to go into the equation of solving this thing, right? But that's all they were good for. Digging up dots, not connecting them. Serial 859 is represented by a, quote, permanent serial charge out sheet of 113063. The subject is June Mail, with only the identification of the assassination added. This is helpful in locating where these removed surveillance records are stored. Quote, has been removed and placed in the special file room of the records branch. There remains, of course, the question, whose mail? Serial 1002, Section 13 is Classic Hoover in the note and Classic FBI in the leaking to Les Whitten of the coming FBI conclusions on its CD1. Hoover wrote on the story, quote, I assume none of this is coming from FBI. Deloach was no less sanctimonious, telling more, we have given Les Whitten no information whatsoever. Technically, it was true. It was not information. Deloach gilded the lily by quoting Whitten as saying he had good sources. P.S. Hoover was not worried. You should heed their cover the ass method. So, I'm not exactly sure what these are. Serial 1042 comments on FBI HQ. These, I believe, are notes that somebody had taken on FBI-related notes. So, they're not going to have much relevance to what we're doing here. Because we don't have any basis of foundation to know what they're really going off of, right? So, let's see. Section 13 is Los Angeles forwarding of the Watley report. PH says Davis equals informant. The equals mark is correct. So Davis was an informant. The question mark can be removed. Hall and Hemming are hand-noted for 105 files. Where are those files? I'd like to see those files. International security nationalistic tendencies. The file on Davis is 134-6356. 134, quote, security informants. Serial 1094, Section 14 represents the forwarding of the borrowed Secret Service copy of the Zapruder film with a request for 2 dubs to be returned with it. HQ sent only 1 dub, with caution for official use only. The Dallas language is Eastman Kodak. Developed original negative and 3 copies for Zapruder. Well, this does represent their knowledge of film. It was a positive that was developed. However, of possible significance is the failure to state the total number of copies the Eastman lab made. This is limited to 3 copies for Z. Says nothing about pirated copies. No Dallas secret. Serial 115, Section 14, PH says it is a copy of the story provided to Jeremiah O'Leary by Lieutenant Donovan, which is accurate. The Deloach to Moore memo says O'Leary left a copy of his story and suggested that Donovan be interviewed. He had not been. He was the next day. The story O'Leary left was not the printed copy. It is a copy of the uncorrected typed draft, a little out of the ordinary for a normal reporter, being helpful. Patriotic, perhaps. Serial 1132, Section 14, has two parts. The first suggests that they learned from Zapruder something looks like exposed at which his camera was going, the rate of exposure which his camera was going. This might account for the Barrett report, which given the wrong speed. The second discusses the Walker bullet without any mention of scientific testing. Conrad lab refers to only how mutilated it was. Dallas PD had already determined it was a .30 caliber and hence not from the so-called Oswald rifle. Ooh, so this is nice. I'm going to have to let's see if we can't find the documents on the Dallas report on the Oswald rifle. So Dallas PD had already determined it was a .30 caliber and hence not from the so-called Oswald rifle. Conrad ignores this and I'm going to this is important. So let me grab this. So let's do some rewind on the rifle itself, okay? So the rifle was ordered allegedly by Oswald in March and arrived in like April, if I'm not mistaken. Or March or April, doesn't fucking matter. Well, it was April 10th was the Walker shooting, so it had to have arrived before then, even though it wasn't used, because apparently we had a .30 caliber used, right? So, that being the case, and having been the case that Frank, the Irishman, Sheehan, did not meet up with David Ferry yet to deliver the 3 Mausers. When the fuck did Loran Hall pawn off the rifle, the 30-06, to Richard Hathcock? I know he picked it up 5 weeks before the assassination. I think it might be safe to assume that the .30 caliber rifle that was used to shoot at Walker's house was most likely Loran Hall's, and it was fired by Lawrence Howard, because that was the only rifle they had with them at the time, right? If I'm not mistaken. It would be after this that they then go to Los Angeles and pawn off the rifle to Richard Hathcock and then pick it back up again. So if it was a .30 caliber and that was a 30-06 Johnson, I think it is... If we can find the original Dallas PD documents that show that the rifle was actually a .30 caliber Johnson, or at least a .30 caliber, we won't know the make of the rifle because they just have the bullet. But if we can determine that, I think it will then be safe to say that the rifle that was used to fire at Walker's house was the Johnson 30-06 that was pawned to Richard Hathcock by Loran Hall and used by Lawrence Howard on April the 10th. So I need to corroborate that date also of when they pawned that rifle, and it has to have been after April 10th of 63. So, good stuff. Let me see. Conrad ignores this and lets it be believed that because of the mutilation, it cannot be determined whether the Walker slug had been fired from the assassination rifle. Getting a .30 caliber through a 6.5 millimeter barrel would make it a truly magic bullet. As Marina said, that is the FBI for you. Serial 1167, Section 15 inadvertently discloses that a Chicago politician informer who provided the info on Johnny Rosin, a liberal, he was a source not of FBI but of Meyer Daley's, quote, social events. This is of interest to me because similar material in great detail reached the Minutemen, from who I obtained it years ago. I suggest the cooperation was between the mayor's people or police and the source. Serial 1188, Section 15, includes the unwanted information that there was a second Oswald helper in the Trade Mart Lit District project, and what I do not recall from Steele's testimony that Oswald told him at the outset the project would last only 15 to 20 minutes. This would seem to indicate that Oswald expected TV coverage at a certain time. This TT coincides with what Steele and Jesse Core both told me about the third man. I am surprised, however, that it took a day for WWL to speak to the FBI, and that the FBI does not appear to have spoken to it after knowing WDSU of the TV coverage. Core and Planer news director WDSU TV both told me that some footage had disappeared by the time the FBI returned the WDSU footage. Okay, so this is interesting. Let me go back and reread some of this. Section 15 includes the unwanted information that there was a second Oswald helper at the Trade Mart. Literature. Okay, so that's what this means. At the Trade Mart Literature Distribution Project, and what I do not recall from Steele's testimony, that Oswald told him at the outset the project would last 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, so when Oswald was being filmed in front of the Trade Mart and it was reported to WDSU to John Corporan by Jesse Core, remember the series of events started with William Gaudet, that Oswald knew before the whole thing started that the whole thing would last 15 to 20 minutes, indicating that he was aware that the TV cameras would be coming. This whole thing, like I said, was a staged fucking event. Let me screenshot this motherfucker because that's pretty important too. You see, all the best shit is like stashed in these like little fucking miscellaneous files, or in the Loran Hall file, item 17, page 6, right? Give me a fucking break. They hid shit on purpose. It's good stuff. All right, continuing on, 11/23/63. This looks to be an FBI memo to Director FBI from Special Agent in Charge, Los Angeles. Reference the assassination of President Kennedy, 11/22/63, Dallas, Texas. Enclosed herewith for the Bureau are 5 copies of the letterhead memo, which are self-explanatory. 1 copy of each letterhead memo is being furnished to Miami and Dallas for information purposes. 1 copy of letterhead memo is being disseminated locally to the Secret Service in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, November 23rd, 63. Dick Watley, 3350 Northwest 18th Terrace, Miami, Florida. On November 23rd, 63, Richard Hathcock, Allied International Detectives, Suite 310, 6605 Hollywood Boulevard, Los Angeles. Telephone number MO 4-5644, advised Roy Payne, his associate in the above enterprise. Hathcock advised as follows. He, Hathcock, has known one Dick Watley for several years. Watley, to the best of Hathcock's information, currently resides at 3350 Northwest 18th Terrace, Miami, Florida. Watley is a male Caucasian. Prior to Hathcock's present occupation, he was the proprietor of the Adventurer's Corner, a shop at the corner of Sunset and La Brea, Los Angeles, which sold articles from all over the world and was an unofficial gathering place for adventurers in this area. Oh, sounds like a CIA hangout. Shortly after the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, Watley, who Hathcock had not seen for some time, came into the Adventurer's Corner and gave Hathcock a shoulder patch which had a skull and crossbones on it, plus the words Brigada Internacional. Watley told Hathcock he had been in Guatemala instructing troops down there, and that he had pulled out a week or 2 prior to the Bay of Pigs invasion and had not participated in the invasion. Hathcock did not see Watley again until about 7 or 8 months ago, when he came to Hathcock's office with 2 other men, all 3 of whom were wearing green fatigues, and one of the men was wearing a mohawk haircut. The men were interested in getting into the wild animal business and asked where they could get some wild animals. Approximately 1 year ago, Jerry Patrick, whose true name is Jerry Hemming, a male Caucasian, approximately 30 to 31 years old, 6'4", he's actually like 6'7", 230 pounds, well-built, curly brown hair, handsome, and Lorenzo Pasio, also known as Lorenzo Hall and Skip Hall, a male Caucasian, 35 to 42 years old, 5'11", 175 to 180 pounds, black hair, mustache, ruddy complexion, from Wichita, Kansas, came into Hathcock's office, which was then located at 6715 Hollywood Boulevard, stating that they were broke and that they knew Dick Watley, and Watley had sent them to him. They had with them a set of golf clubs and a .30-06 Johnson semi-automatic rifle with a Bushnell variable scope. Hathcock loaned them $100, $50 on each item, as it was his understanding they were to pick up the articles as soon as possible. Hathcock only saw Jerry Patrick once after that, and that was approximately 1 week later, when he again came to the office. Several months ago, since the men did not retrieve their articles, Hathcock sold the golf clubs. On September 18th, 63, Lorenzo Hall came back in with $50 and retrieved the rifle. Shortly thereafter, Hathcock received a telephone call from Jerry Patrick, who was then residing at 2450 Northwest North River Drive, Miami, Florida, inquiring as to whether Hathcock still had the rifle. Hathcock had told him that he had given the rifle to Hall for $50, and this seemed to irritate Patrick to some extent. Since then, Hathcock had sent the receipt he received from Hall for the $50 to Patrick, he convinced him that he had returned for the rifle. He had returned the rifle. On the day Hall retrieved the rifle, he sold him a looks like a Bolex motion picture camera with a telephoto lens, which was then the property of Hathcock. Hall paid by 2 checks, one drawn on the Citizens Bank on the account of the Committee to Free Cuba in the amount of $350, and another in the amount of $150 on the account of a resident of La Habra. Hathcock gave Hall back $100. Hathcock advised both Patrick and Hall are violently anti-communist and anti-Castro, and they both told him they fought in the mountains with Castro in Cuba, however, fell out with him after the revolution. Lorenzo told Hathcock he spent several months in prison in Cuba, however, eventually got back to the United States. Patrick stated that he fell out with Castro and eventually got back to the United States. Hathcock, this is the next page, Dick Whatley heading. Hathcock has Xerox copies of newspaper articles from Florida in his office concerning the anti-Castro troops training there, and Patrick's picture appears as one of the anti-Castro troops. Patrick, when in Los Angeles, had an address of 1209 South Atlantic Alhambra, Atlantic Radio and TV, telephone number AT1-6421, and an address of In Care of Howard K. Davis, 3350 Northwest 18th Terrace, Miami, Florida, telephone number NE4-1373. It is Hathcock's information that Davis was Castro's personal pilot and also a close friend of Dick Whatley. Lorenzo Hall now resides at 1191 College View Drive, Apartment 7, Monterey Park, California. Telephone number 261-8911, and Hathcock does not know where he is now employed. He last saw Hall about 2 weeks ago when he came by Hathcock's office simply to talk. Hathcock reiterated that both men are anti-communist and very strongly anti-Castro. This document contains neither recommendations nor conclusions of the FBI. It is the property of the FBI and loaned to your agency. It is, and its contents are not to be distributed outside of your agency. All right. Good background information on all of these guys and kind of the relationship between Hathcock and Jerry Hemming, Loran Hall. And I don't know if we'll get to it today or if it's in any of these documents, but Hathcock also told the FBI that Loran Hall came September 17th or September 18th and picked up the rifle, and that he stayed in Los Angeles and then came back and visited Hathcock 5 days before the assassination, making what, about the 17th or 18th of November. Could it have been the 17th of November? Because remember, we've got the incident at the Carousel Club where Hall is in Dallas. I'll have to check the dates on that. But allegedly, 5 days before the assassination, he said he is going back to Dallas. And so, yeah, some good background on these guys and their relationship with Dick Whatley, who was also involved in this no-name key group. As well as Howard K. Davis is a name that pops up also associated with all these mercenaries. All right, let's move on. This is just a cover sheet, it looks like. Received from Harold Weisberg, 6777. Interview with Lawrence Howard, 22568 by Jim Garrison et al. Okay, so the reason I included this was because that fucking interview with Lawrence Howard doesn't exist in any of the Garrison files, but it's one of Garrison's interviews, okay? Interview of Lawrence Howard by Jim Garrison, February 25th, 1968, okay? That fucking doesn't exist. Does not exist. Interview Loran Hall, 5668 by Jim Garrison et al. That doesn't exist either. That fucking doesn't exist either. Interview of Loran Hall in February of 68 by Harold Weisberg. Hopefully that exists. Index to Volume 2 of Whitewash. Okay, hopefully this fucking interview of Loran Hall from February of 68 actually fucking exists. Harold Weisberg and A. Schwartz. All right, so just make a mental note that Garrison had an interview with Lawrence Howard that fucking doesn't exist anymore. He had an interview of Loran Hall that doesn't fucking exist anymore. And we have an interview by Harold Weisberg that we're hoping still exists, that we're going to do some research into. Okay? Dated February of 68. So when we come across it, and if it's dated February of 68, then we know that's the right one. Moving on. All right. This appears to be a newspaper article. by Dick Russell. Dick Russell was an investigator into Kennedy back in the day. Wrote a couple books. Couldn't tell you which ones, obviously, because they didn't solve shit. Let me go ahead and read through this. And I think when I get through with this article, this will wrap up for today. So we'll get back on this stuff tomorrow. We've got about 100 of these fucking PDFs, and we're only on number 19 surrounding Loran Hall. So we're gonna become Loran Hall experts over the next couple weeks. All right, so I don't have a title to this article, but it's by Dick Russell. Loran Hall was scared. He sat in his Long Beach, California real estate office on a Saturday afternoon late in May, 10 days before he would invoke the Fifth Amendment at a hearing of the House Assassinations Committee. Every time the bell rang, he took a revolver from beneath a pile of papers and stuck it under his belt. The day before, Hall had received a phone call. There had been several calls since May 19th when 2 congressional investigators served him with a subpoena to testify about the assassination of President Kennedy. Someone had left a dead cat in his front yard and a dead pigeon with a Kennedy $50 in its bill outside his office. Someone had threatened one of his kids at school. Most of that Hall had attributed to nuts and weirdos, but not yesterday's call. This one was explicit. Santo is taking a yacht trip in the Bahamas on the 6th. He would like to return on the 8th. Hall, who was scheduled to testify on June 7th, said he replied, "As far as I'm concerned, he can." The caller hung up. Hall believed the message concerned Santo Trafficante Jr., alleged mafia don of southern Florida and reputedly one of the most powerful mobsters in the country. According to congressional sources, the House committee wanted to question Hall about his association with Trafficante, an association that apparently began in 1959 when Hall and Trafficante spent 5 months together in a Havana jail, and continued during the early 60s when Hall was soliciting anti-Castro funds from wealthy Americans. The committee was also interested in a taped interview given to investigators by Dutch journalist William Oltmans. In this interview, Hall reportedly claimed that he had attended a meeting in Dallas during the summer of '63. There he said he had been offered $50,000 to kill Kennedy. Why these people make these fucking statements, I don't know. I'll never know. When someone accuses you of killing the president, even if you did it, especially if you did it, you say, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Jesus Christ. And House investigators wanted to ask Hall about his possible relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald. FBI reports had raised the possibility that Hall may have been seen with Oswald in Dallas 2 months before Kennedy's death, a time the Warren Commission had placed Oswald elsewhere. Hall refused to answer all questions when he appeared before the committee on June 7th. Although he was scheduled to testify again on September 14th, his subpoena was continued pending a new date. It has been rumored that the committee is trying to gather more evidence against Hall. The committee's chief investigator reportedly suggested that Hall might be granted immunity if he were to testify. But Hall has said that he is not inclined to trust the committee. Early this summer, he agreed to an interview with me, provided no tape recording was made. A conversation between us in October 1976 was taped by mutual agreement. Where the fuck is that interview, huh? Where the fuck is that interview? During our interviews, Hall spoke of Trafficante and of a plot apparently funded by organized crime to assassinate Fidel Castro in 1963. Hall said he participated in the plot, along with Trafficante and 2 other reputed organized crime figures, Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli. Hall repeated his account of the $50,000 offer made, he said, at a meeting in Dallas Oilman's office a few months before Kennedy was killed, referring to Lester Logue. He also told me that shortly before the assassination, he had heard Lee Harvey Oswald's name mentioned by a Cuban exile, but he denied that he and Oswald ever met. Hall spoke of efforts to implicate him in the president's death, in which he claims to have played no role. He said he believes some of these efforts may involve federal authorities. Hall, 47, was raised in Wichita, Kansas. He quit high school to join the Army, served in Germany as a sergeant, and went to Havana in 1959. He was working in Santo Trafficante's Hotel Capri Casino when Castro seized power and began evicting the American gangsters who had thrived under Batista. In April of '59, Hall was sent to a... where does this continue? Okay, here we go. Was sent to a Quonset hut prison in which Trafficante was being held. There were 6 huts altogether, and the rest were packed with wall-to-wall people, Hall says. In ours, there was Santo, his son-in-law, and one of his dealers. One of his dealers, that's Henry Savadra, whom I've already said I believe is an alias for Jack Valente. I was the fourth. When you walked in, you saw like a living room in the front. There were 4 barrels, all with ice in them, water, fruit, wines, and champagne, Coke and Pepsi. Santo had his meals catered. The food came out every night in a Cadillac. That's true. He must be talking about Trescornia, because this is exactly how they described Trescornia. Hall's story is corroborated by a CIA Warren Commission report memo to the director, 27th November 63, declassified in 76, which tells of John Wilson, a British journalist who had learned of Cuba of a gangster gambler named Santo, who could not return to the USA because there were several indictments outstanding against him. Santo opted therefore to remain in prison for a period of time, paying Castro for his rather luxurious and definitely non-prison-like accommodations. While Santo was in prison, he was visited by an American gangster type named Ruby. That is correct. According to the Warren report, Jack Ruby visited Cuba in September 1959, the month Hall was released from prison. Hall says he never met Ruby. He does not deny, however, that he met American gangster types while in prison. One of them, according to Hall, was Johnny Roselli, who has been described as a recruiter for CIA mafia plots to assassinate Castro. Hall says he met Roselli again in the spring of 1963, and that Hall was a leader of the group of anti-Castro Cubans who were working with other exiles to plan a second Bay of Pigs. He recalls that he got in touch with the Trafficante organization early in 1963. Then, about April, he says he was invited to a meeting in a Miami Beach hotel where John Martino, reputedly a fringe mob figure, introduced him to a Cuban exile leader, Eddie Bayo, to Roselli and Giancana. Hall describes the meeting. Out of the other room came Santo Trafficante. Giancana looked at me and said, "Is this the one?" Santo said yes and walked out. The only reason he was there was to verify me. We discussed money and whether Martino, an electronics expert, could make the necessary equipment. Meetings continued, Hall says, until late May. As a cover, a story was circulated that 2 Soviet colonels were prepared to defect and testify that Russian missiles were still on Cuban soil. D. Pauly, a retired U.S. ambassador to Cuba and former assistant secretary of both State and Defense, that he should something his yacht. He should maybe loan his yacht, his yacht to spirit the colonels, use his yacht to spirit the colonels to the United States. The cover may have also convinced Life magazine, which reportedly prepared to send a writer and photographer along on the rescue mission. This basic story, without mention of Hall or an assassination plot, appeared in a 1975 copyrighted article in Soldier of Fortune magazine. The article called The Mission Operation Red Cross and reported that John Martino, the electronics expert, had helped to enlist Pauly's yacht and acquire $15,000 in front money from Life magazine. Remember, Life magazine was a CIA front. Richard Billings was the Life reporter assigned to cover Operation Red Cross. Billings is reluctant to discuss his involvement, except to say that he then believed the plan centered on the Soviet colonel's defection. "I'm trying to find out some more things about the mission, things I didn't know before," Billings told me. "I'm still very curious about what else may have surrounded it. But at the time of the operation, I did not know of any involvement by Loran Hall." Billings says Life never gave the mission financial backing. Hall agrees. Time Life didn't put up a dime, he says. The money came from Sam Giancana. "I saw Giancana give $30 to John Martino to buy supplies." And then it continues on the next page. I'm assuming this is continued. And here's a separate photograph and a quote. At first, I thought Congress was going to try to find the truth, Hall says, but apparently they don't want me to clear myself. And there's this hilarious picture of Hall with his little mustache. Hall says he's made the scapegoat in a cover-up of the JFK assassination. That's hilarious. All right, continuing the article. Hall says he left Miami for New York in May of 63 because he believed he was under FBI surveillance. Before he could return, the mission, including his own group of anti-Castro raiders, took off for Cuba. On the night of June 9th, Eddie Bayo and 9 others apparently left Pauly's yacht by speedboat and headed for the southeast coast of Cuba. They were not seen again. According to Soldier of Fortune, Pauly arranged for a CIA search party, but Bayo and his men weren't found. Hall, who returned to Miami a few weeks after the missing boat, says he was first informed that Bayo's team was safe in the mountains of Cuba. Then in September, he was told Bayo had died. The team's fate may remain a mystery. Early this year, Trafficante took the Fifth Amendment when he was subpoenaed by the House Assassinations Committee. John Martino, according to Soldier of Fortune, was, quote, afraid of something and never discussed the mission. He died of a heart attack in 1975. Giancana, who also died in 1975 after being shot. William Pauley committed suicide last January, and Johnny Roselli's body was found in an oil drum in Biscayne Bay last year. Shortly after Roselli's death, columnist Jack Anderson reported that Roselli had told him he was convinced the last Mafia hit team sent to Cuba had been captured and persuaded to work with Castro. Roselli purportedly told Anderson that members of his team who might have been Cubans told the old Trafficante organization later returned to the U.S. to assassinate JFK and set up Oswald. Could Roselli have been referring to the missing crew of Operation Red Cross? Hall wouldn't speculate, but told me, quote, you gotta know Santos Trafficante had Cuba locked up prior to Castro. The narcotics, the gambling, everything. When he got kicked out, he still had his connections. It might have been a thing where Santos says to himself, I can still insure my shipments of dope from Cuba to here. All I gotta do is put the word into Fidel if these guys are coming over to put a hit on him. This theory was first published in a 1976 Washington Post article by George Kreil. In it, Kreil quoted a Federal Bureau of Narcotics report that said Trafficante was, quote, allegedly Castro's outlet for illegal contraband in his country. The article also quoted a Miami Cuban, Jose Aleman, who recalled Trafficante's telling him late in 62, quote, mark my words, this man Kennedy is in trouble, and he will get what is coming to him. He is going to be hit, quote. Let me just stop right here. This fucking explanation of the relationship between Trafficante and Castro and the true nature of their relationship moving forward and the drugs coming in and the fucking fake hits, which I'm telling you, there were never any hits on Castro, ever. They were fake fucking hits. They were cover stories meant to cover for smuggling operations. And this is some of the first backing that I really have for that theory. All being run through Trafficante. Fucking fascinating. And I seem to be right once again. Just saying. Hall says he had no contact with Trafficante after the meeting in April of 63. Others aren't sure. Jerry Patrick Hemming, who worked with Hall on anti-Castro activity, said Hall left Miami for Dallas shortly before November 22, 1963, with plans to see Trafficante in St. Petersburg on the way. Hall claims that he didn't see Trafficante and that he was not in Dallas on the day of the assassination. I was in Monterey Park, California, shaving when the news came on TV, he said. I'd just taken my wife to her job and I was getting ready to go out and apply for work. Stop right there. We now have a contradiction because he claims that he was at a place called IPC Hospital Supply with a guy named Hudson. So now we have two different alibis that Hall has given. All right? Two different alibis. Completely incorrect. A few months before the assassination, Hall says he attended the portentous meeting in Dallas at which he was offered $50,000. The meeting began as a fundraiser for his anti-Castro cause. Hall says, but then a man who owned a trucking company in Dallas jumped off and offered me $50,000 to blow Kennedy away. Hall says that oil man Lester Logue, in whose office the meeting allegedly occurred, immediately disassociated himself with the offer. Logue said he'd have nothing to do with it and broke up the meeting. When I telephoned Logue, he denied that any such meeting took place. Sure, I knew Loran, Logue said. I helped him when he and a group of Cubans were ostensibly making raids into Cuba. I had nothing to do with Kennedy. There's no point in my answering Hall's charge because, of course, it's a fabrication. Hall says, quote, I volunteered to take a voice analysis and a lie detector concerning my meeting we had in Dallas, and I would welcome Lester Logue and his attorney to the session. If you'd like to, he can take the test with me. The day Kennedy was shot, a Cuban refugee named Sylvia Odio fainted when Lee Harvey Oswald's face appeared on her TV screen. Odio later told the Warren Commission that Oswald and two Latins, who called themselves Angelo and Leopoldo, had solicited funds at her Dallas apartment on the night of September 26, 1963. When Leopoldo telephoned her the next day, she told the commission he said Oswald was an expert shotsman who felt Kennedy, quote, should have been assassinated after the Bay of Pigs, and who was soon to be introduced to, quote, the underground in Cuba. After hearing Odio's testimony, the Warren Commission asked the FBI to investigate. On September 16, 1964, FBI agents visited Loran Hall in California. The FBI's report said Hall admitted visiting Odio with a Mexican-American named Lawrence Howard and a man named William Seymour who looked slightly like Oswald. Oh my God, they figured out this shit in 1967, right? Or 1977 when this article was written, right? It was obviously Loran Hall and Lawrence Howard and William Seymour who went Sylvia Odio's. Duh. The Warren Commission concluded that Odio had been mistaken when she identified Oswald as one of her visitors. Then, just after the report went to press, Odio examined photographs of Hall, Howard, and Seymour and said she was certain they were not the men who had visited her. She again told FBI investigators that she could identify Oswald as one of those who came to her apartment on September 16th. Odio's testimony is considered significant because the Warren Commission had concluded that Oswald was on a bus trip between New Orleans and Mexico City on the night that Odio said she was visited by him. Hall, like Odio, disagrees with the commission. Hall says, when I read the Warren report, what I supposedly told the FBI, not one statement resembled what I really said. I never told the FBI I'd seen Mrs. Odio. I told the agents Mrs. Odio's name and picture didn't strike a note with me. He said, well, could there be a possibility you ever met her? I said, sure, I had met hundreds of people there in Dallas, Texas. The reasons for the FBI's first visit to Hall remained unclear. Hall said he believes it was part of a conscious effort to use him as a scapegoat in the assassination cover-up. Hall says he believes that Kennedy assassination and plan to kill Castro are related. I think the Castro mission has an absolutely direct bearing on the assassination, he told me. I'd go so far as to say I probably sat as close as I'm sitting to you now to some of the people who had a part in it. You don't fucking say. But I really can't be sure who they are. Hall told me that he had been willing to talk to the House committee until investigators Clifford Fenton and Ken Klein duped him at a meeting in Los Angeles. Hall said he had set up ground rules by which he would give an informal deposition in the presence of radio newsman Art Kevin, whom he trusted. Kevin, who acted as an intermediary between Hall and the committee, says Hall wanted me there as a backup to make sure his words weren't twisted. The committee agreed, then turned around, ordered me to leave, and subpoenaed him. They made a willing witness into a hostile witness. Fenton, the committee's chief JFK investigator, says no such agreement was made. Quote, Hall's name has come up enough times with other witnesses that we feel he might have evidence that's really material to this case, but there's no way he could have a reporter present while we were interviewed. To which Hall replies, quote, at first I really thought Congress was going to try to find the truth, but they apparently don't want me to clear myself. For 14 years, it seems every agency in the world has kept me from getting my story out. Why should now be any different? So, Hall's story, like every other alibi story that we've come across so far, is nothing more than that. These are alibi stories that these people keep trying to push. They keep trying to prove their innocence. And if you ask me, it's ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. But that is going to do it for today's show. Check back in tomorrow. We'll have another episode. I'll be doing episodes daily until we get through this Loran Hall stuff, which will probably be like 3 weeks from now. But it's really important. He was a shooter, right? He was one of the shooters in the book depository on the 6th floor. Therefore, he's super important. Therefore, we're going to spend some time on him. But that's it for today, guys. Please go ahead and buy the book. If you're interested in an autographed copy of the book, please message me on Telegram or email me, Corey@CoreyHughes.org. And that's going to do it for today, guys. And I will see y'all tomorrow.